We are on air.
Neil, can you hear us? Oh. Is that a yes?
A shriek of feedback emanated from the loudspeakers.
Is that Neil clearing his throat?
He's locked himself
Yes.
in his office.
Yeah, that was me.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, so welcome everyone to Toronto Perl Mongers, especially to those of you who are joining us on Hangouts. I see there are a number of you. Today we've got two guest speakers. Neil will be joining us from Oxford, I believe, somewhere around there. And Yanick from Ottawa is local to us this evening. I think that's, there's no business that we need to attend to, is there?
With the minutes from last.
Well, I usually would try to plug the next meeting or something like that. You've got a speaker lined up for the next meeting, right, Dave?
Yeah, actually, next month, Doug Hoyt will be coming in and talking about his new business, Log Periodic. So he's building a new logging platform that he's going to show us. And if anyone knows, anyone who's attended meetings where Doug has spoken, know he's one of those mad geniuses. He'll talk about everything from DNA to Roman numerals or reading ancient Greek with regular expressions. So,
Can you guys hear Dave when he's talking on the Hangouts?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Just because I didn't see the green light flashing on the broadcast there. Okay, so yeah, so we've got Doug Hoyt next month, and I guess we're ready for you, Neil, to take it away on the River of CPAN.
Okay, so now you can see my screen. Can you see the dependencies title?
Yep.
So this is a talk about the River of CPAN model, a way of thinking about dependencies on CPAN and some of the issues. This of one of the QA hackathons in 2015 in Berlin. A group of us were talking about various problems that people perceived and experienced with CPAN, and in trying to think about those and express them in a number of group sessions, we came up with this model. So starting off kind of from some basic principles, I'll go through these quite quickly and then kind of get onto the meat of the topic. So modules use other modules. Yeah, no big surprise there. If you look at the source code of the net Twitter module, this is the top of it, or it was some months ago. And one of the modules it uses is class load, which is another module on CPAN.
Sorry, Neil, are you switching slides? Because we're just seeing your first slide.
Ah, I am switching slides, yes.
We're not seeing the display window.
I would suggest canceling the screen share and restarting it.
Yeah, it looks like we're seeing your presenter window, I think.
Ah,
Yeah, right,
Okay.
yeah, there we go.
So it looks like when I go into full screen, into presentation mode, it's dropping out of sharing. Okay.
A few years back.
That's a bit crap. If I get rid of that. Okay, this is going to screw up all my fantastic builds. Oh well. Right. Okay. Let me wind up a bit then. Modules use other modules. This is net Twitter. So are you seeing it now as I go through slides?
Yeah.
Okay. Uses a number of modules, including class load, which is in a different distribution on CPAN. If you look at class load, this is the top of that module, and it uses try tiny, as do a lot of other modules on CPAN. Looking at the kind of dependencies between them, net Twitter depends on class load, which depends on try tiny. Are released to CPAN as part of a distribution. So when you type CPAN NetTwitter, you want to install the NetTwitter module. You don't care about all the other modules, etc. You just think you're using NetTwitter. What the CPAN client does is it goes and looks in the CPAN index, and you can go and grab this yourself from CPAN in that directory. And it's basically a big text file that has, on the left is all the names of modules that are on CPAN somewhere, and on the right is the tarball that contains the latest version of the module, and the middle number is the latest version of the module. So really well. So when you say I want to install NetTwitter, it finds NetTwitter on there in the file, and this is telling it that the NetTwitter module is part of the NetTwitter, the dash rather than colon distribution. And the tarball you can see there, so it knows which user's directory to go and get that tarball from. If you go and look at a distributions page on Meta CPAN rather than a modules page, so this is the distribution page for NetTwitter, so you can see there's a whole bunch of modules. And actually, if you typed CPAN NetTwitter error in the distribution being installed as well, because all of those modules are listed in the index. So this is where my first build is going to fail. So you have modules here with dependencies between them. So there's supposed to be a nice animated thing switching down to showing you the names. So each of those has the corresponding distribution name, and there's dependencies between those distributions. And if we look at the one in the middle, class load, it has try-tiny as an upstream dependency. So it's depending on try-tiny, and a downstream dependent of class load. Also called a reverse dependency. So on Meta CPAN, when you're looking at a distribution, on the right sidebar, you'll see a link reverse dependencies. What that's showing you is distributions which are immediately downstream, so directly using this distribution, which basically means it's using at least one of the modules in that distribution. Like background of modules and distributions. So the River of CPAN. So earlier this year, there were 35,380 distributions on CPAN. So that's all of CPAN. And of those, nearly 70% of them have no downstream dependent. So that means there's no other distribution on CPAN that uses them. Of course, it could be that they're being used by lots of other people off CPAN, but for the River of CPAN model, at least at the moment, we're just talking about these between distributions on CPAN. So 70% of the distributions on CPAN have no downstream dependent. And this is the C, if you like, in this model. So that's 2/3 of CPAN, or a bit more than 2/3. When I first started generating stats for this, it was roughly 2/3. So the percentage of the C as a percentage of all of CPAN is slowly going up as CPAN grows. There are nearly 4,000 distributions that have one downstream dependent. So there's one other distribution on CPAN that relies on it. And only 1,600 that have two dependents. And that can either mean that there's two different distributions depending on it, or there's a chain of there's one depending on it, and that in turn has one depending on it. You can imagine as you go further to the left in this model, you get kind of more and more complicated graphs showing dependencies. So if we look at just the first 10 positions in that river, you can see how quickly that drops off from 4,000 distributions with one dependent to that have 10 distributions depending on them. So then if we look at chunks of those. So 0, 1 to 9. So this is kind of like logarithmic binning. You can see that all the way on the left-hand side of the river, there are 56 distributions on CPAN that have 10,000 or more other distributions depending on them. So if you remember that there are 35,000 distributions on CPAN, roughly speaking. So there are more than 10,000 distributions. That's nearly a third is dependent, not necessarily directly, but possibly indirectly. If we do a logarithmic axis on that, you can see how that is actually linear in that space. And that top end of the river, these 56, we started referring to as the head of the river. So these are the ones that all of us are relying on every day. So there are 56 distributions, but most of those are actually green just changed. I don't know if you can still see my screen.
Yep. Yep, we see head of the river and not core.
And not core.
So there are 56 in the head of the river. Most of those are core modules, which are dual life, which means they're released with Perl, but they also have a CPAN distribution. So there are only 5 of those 56 which are non-core modules. And so these are those 5 in order. So the most relied on module on CPAN that's not a core module is try-tiny, which is why I used it in the first example. And notice that 3 of these 5 modules are test modules, so the ones that lots of people use in their test suites. So before going further, well, what dependencies do we consider? Of course, I'm sure all of you have read those thrilling blog posts I've been doing recently on dependencies on CPAN and how they're specified. So when your distribution specifies a dependency, you can stage it's needed in installing your module. So it can be the configure stage, build, runtime, test, main ones. Develop is a special kind of dependency which says, I use these modules as part of my development process. You don't have to have it to run the module, but if you want to develop the same way I do, and this might mean just to run your author tests or your release tests, then you need these modules. So there are 5 phases. Time is the ones where when someone's running your module, those modules have to be present. Use your module. There are 4 types of dependency as well. The most widely used one is requires, which basically says this module has to be present for my module to work. In the metadata for a distribution, the JSON version of it, the prereqs is basically a big hash of these dependencies. And you can see that there are 2 levels within. The first level is the phase, so configure, develop, runtime, and test, you can see here. And then within each of those, there can be any of those 4 types. So requires, suggests, recommends, or conflicts. And so you can see here, the test one has got both recommends and requires. And notice here now, when you're specifying the dependencies for your distribution, again, you talk about modules. So you say, my distribution depends on this module. And then it's up to the CPAN client to map that to a distribution, because occasionally a module will change from one distribution to another. So you don't want to say it's this distribution that I'm dependent on, it's this module that I need to have present. So now there's a grid of 20 possibilities of the type and phase. When we're looking at the River of CPAN, or which ones, how many dependencies have you really got? It's these 4 types that we worry about. So develop, we don't include, and it's only ones that are required. So really where this whole model came from was talking about polluting of the river. And we had somewhat of a coarse metaphor while we were actually having the discussions about what that pollution might be that people are putting into the river. But I'll let your imagination fill in the gaps. But so let's cut that. Probably best I didn't. Let's say it's a factory dumping stuff into the river. And when you dump stuff into a river, anyone who's upriver from you, well, they don't get to see it. But everyone who's downriver from you, they get to taste that crap in the water. So let's say your distribution is this green one, and you've put it on CPAN, and there are 6 other distributions on CPAN that rely on your distribution working. So if you release a broken version onto CPAN, then people can't install your module. But then that also means that when someone goes to install those 2 modules, because yours is a prerequisite, already got it installed, it'll try and install yours first and it will break. So then those 2 won't install. So then those 3 won't install, and then that one won't install. So the further upriver you are, the more of other people's distributions you can break by doing a bad release. Pollution flows downstream. And what that means for CPAN and this model is breakage flows downstream. So what is pollution? The most obvious one that happens is failing tests. So request and you think that's great, or you hack up some quick idea, you put it out, and then you don't notice that some test fails. Or it might be that it fails on a certain version of Perl that's not your version of Perl, or on a different operating system. It might be a bug. It could be a syntax that breaks on older or newer Perls. So the one that probably has bitten me the most, and probably a lot of people the most, is using the or operator that was introduced with 5.10. And I just write that all the time, and it's so easy to put that and release it and then think, oh crap, that doesn't work on 5.6 and 5.8. An installation test that should be an author or release test. So a classic example of this is people who've got pod checks as a regular test instead of an author release test. You don't really want to stop someone just because you didn't close some over and back construct in your pod. Or it could be that you're not robustly handling UTF-8. In an English-speaking country, you might just test your module with plain ASCII text, and then you release it and discover, oops, it breaks for someone using more adventurous text. So then looking upstream, so we thought about, well, downstream. So if you look upstream from your module, the more distributions that you rely on, the more likely it is that an upstream distribution will break your dist. So just the law of averages says, well, the more there are, the more chance there is that one of those will get broken, and then that breaks your distribution. So you release this green thing onto CPAN, and the way you look at it, you're just relying on 2 distributions. Actually, well, you need to think about, well, what distributions are they relying on? So you need to think about the whole dependency graph, so the upstream graph. And there's a number of ways you can look at this. There's a number of tools. So one of them is this module app prereq grapher, which is a script that I wrote that just generates the graph for you in dot format, which is used by the GraphViz tool. So your distribution might only be as reliable as the least reliable distribution in your dependency graph. So it might be that one of those modules you rely on is pretty flaky, but not in the part of it that you rely on. So you might actually be okay, but you don't know. So that you might be only as reliable as the least reliable distribution in your dependency graph. So, and it might be this one that you're not even aware that you're reliant on. Core modules, in a way, don't count, because there's an awful lot more work that goes into making sure that core modules are dependable and reliant and work across the range of operating systems and versions of Perl, which is why the further you go upstream, the more modules you find that on core other modules. So you'll see people saying there are no non-core dependencies for this distribution. And that's because if it's a core module, it doesn't have to be installed. So if it's already installed, there's just less chance of it breaking when someone's trying to install your module. A key kind of thing, and this took a while before it really sunk in, even when we were discussing this module, this model at the QA hackathon, that you don't get to pick your position on the river. So you might think, wow, I've written this awesome module. Everyone's going to start using this and it's going to be like way up in the river, but you don't get to pick it. Other distributions push you upstream by choosing to use your module. So when you first release a module on CPAN, it's in the sea. No one's using it because you've only just released it, so no one knows about it yet. So that's this situation here. You've just released it. It's got no downstream dependence. And there's this little chain here. And then the module on the left that's got 2 downstream dependents itself chooses to use your module. And it has suddenly pushed you from 0 up to 3. It's your position on the river is completely determined by the people who are using you, using them. Another reality of this model and of CPAN is that your position on the river can change rapidly. So you might be paddling down in the shallow end and 3 downstream dependents and everything's hunky-dory. And unbeknownst to you, someone who's way upriver likes to look at your module and says, yeah, okay, I'm going to rely on this. And suddenly you've been zoomed way upstream. And now if you do some, and you may be thinking, this is just something that I'm not together. I just scratched my own itch and I'm happy a couple of other people are using it. Suddenly, tons of people might be relying on your module in production. They don't know, they might not know they're relying on your module in production, and you probably don't know, and you won't know until you break all their code. So, and here you might be happily thinking, yeah, I've only got 2 downstream dependents, and direct dependents, yes, that's all you've got. So beware the big downstream dependent is one of the messages from this. And I actually kind of experienced this myself with a module I wrote, a simple little module path, and it's got 11 immediate dependents. When I started playing with looking at dependency graphs, I was kind of surprised to discover that I had more than 600 downstream dependents. And that was because one of my small handful of dependents is Perl prereq scanner, which is then used by a whole bunch of other tools, one of them being Diszilla. So suddenly I gained a whole load of other dependencies. The flip side of this, so that's kind of like looking downstream and who you could break, is, well, if you're looking at modules on CPAN and thinking, okay, there's several modules that I could use for this task, should I pick? When you choose to use the module, using it pushes them upstream of you. So you might want to think about, well, do I really want to do that? And does the author of that module want to do that? Module might say, yeah, this is just some hack. I'm putting it out there instead of just because it might be of use to someone, like someone who's perhaps going to embrace their module being pushed upstream. Yeah, it might. You might want to look at the module and think about, well, how far upriver is it? How many other distributions are already relying on it? And you're the first person who's going to start using this module, then it might be a good idea to contact the author and let them know. One, it's always nice to hear from other people. Hey, I like your module. I'm going to use it. they might be surprised that someone else is using their code. But then if they steadily get a trickle, it kind of makes them aware that their module is steadily moving upriver. One of the key places to look if you are thinking of using a module is the CPAN testers matrix. I don't know how many of you, let's have a quick show of hands from the people I can see in the room. How many of you regularly use this to look at the status for a distribution? So, slowly going up. Okay, that was like 4.5. I'll take the wobbling hand as a kind of like. So I found that the more I think about this model and the more I've been thinking about it, the more now this is the place I go and look to look at as a first kind of check on the health for a distribution. And what this is showing, this is a grid of across the top is operating systems and down the left is versions of Perl from the most recent at the top to the oldest at the bottom. And if it's green, that basically means all tests have passed for the distribution that you're looking at, Perl and operating systems. And if you look at this one, you can see the Windows column, MS-Win32 in the middle, those are all green. So people on Windows are probably saying, yeah, this distribution's fine, it's very reliable. But if you're on pretty much any other operating system, well, your mileage may vary, is probably the most positive thing you could say about it. And the thing is, so when someone installs a module, if its upstream dependencies fails, then that module will fail and you'll see a failure here. So when you go and click on any of these cells in the grid, you can see the details of any given failure, and quite a lot of failures are down to upstream failures. So good first port of call is the CPAN testers matrix. Look at how many outstanding bugs the distribution's got, when did it last have a release, and then also, well, if you're not feeling so good about this module, then you might start looking for other modules and see, have they got a better river health? Obviously, this is all talking about CPAN, and you shouldn't forget DARTPAN. There are plenty of modules on CPAN that, for very obvious reasons, don't have lots of dependencies, downstream dependence on CPAN. So if you think about ACK, so it really doesn't have very many other CPAN distributions dependent on it, but loads of people are dependent on it. So it isn't the whole picture. One of the things we talked about at a subsequent QA hackathon was ways that we could possibly start aggregating other data so that when people are using a module a lot, that could get factored into it as well and give it weight on the CPAN river. So some realities then of the dependency graph. You might release a distribution on CPAN and you say, yep, I support all versions of Perl, which these days means version 5.6 onwards. And I support all operating systems. And you might think that, you might not bother to test it, but you think, yeah, I'm just using standard portable Perl, it'll be fine. But looking at your upstream graph, there might be one module way upstream that doesn't work on 132, one that only works on 5.8 plus, one works on 5.10 plus. So the versions of Perl and the operating systems that your distribution supports is, but again, the same caveat as before, may well be the intersection of those supported by your upstream distribution. So actually, there's a good chance that your module only works on 510 plus. If that module there that's got 510 plus, if that's got a hard restriction put in its metadata saying this module cannot be installed on anything before 510, then actually your module just plain won't install on those older versions of Perl. So looking at water quality, then, this was another notion that we talked about, was that the further upriver a distribution is, the more reliable it needs to be. And this is kind of similar to the thinking about a real life river and pollution. If you're going to start fixing the pollution in the river, where you want to go is upstream, because there's no point making the down end of the river clean if someone is dumping loads of crap upriver, because that's still going to flow past you anyway. So the further a distribution goes upriver, the more reliable it needs to be, because basically more distributions are relying on it. And if we look at the water quality, so just looking at CPAN testers, so this is slightly old data, but this is those same logarithmic bins again. And these are the bins that I use whenever I look at kind of segmenting the river. You can see that distributions with no other distributions relying on them have the highest number of fails and unknowns. And as it goes up, as you go upstream steps, it basically gets better and better. And basically, this is kind of, I don't know what the law would be called, but the law of other people shouting at you when you break shit on CPAN. So if you release a bad version of a module and no one else is relying on it, well, then you just might not notice. If you've got 500 modules that all break when you do a bad release, there's a pretty good chance that some number of those 500 people will start barking at you. And this is quite often the first point where people realize that lots of other people are now dependent on their module. You know, they've been happily thinking that they were mucking around in the sea, and late night release on a Friday before going out on a bender, and half of CPAN over the weekend. Of course, this has never happened. All I'm saying is you might want to avoid some of Yannick's modules. That's terribly unfair of me to say that, but I feel like I've got to get in a jab at Yanick. You'd be much better off depending on Yannick's modules than mine, as Olaf will attest. But one thing you might notice though is when you move to the very top of the river, you can see the number of fails just starts going up again. Anyone care to guess why that is?
Very old ones.
So it's basically because a lot of those, so if you remember, the head of the river are almost all core modules, and a lot of them are modules that have been in Perl since Perl 5, and they kind of have always worked, and no one's really maintaining them, but they're kind of seen as functionally complete, but they don't always follow modern conventions. So occasionally they're perhaps not quite as robust on some versions of Perl, etc. So that's why there's a slight increase. One of the things when we started looking at this data was it made me want to think, okay, let's start looking at those. So I have done some pull requests on distributions at the head of the river. The trouble is, having thought all about this and thought about the implications of breaking a distribution that's up there has made me really nervous about doing pull requests on that. So, which is a bit of a strange side effect. Or I'm just a wimp, I guess. Of looking at it is that this is just the number of CPAN testers fails, and you can see it is gradually getting better as you go along. Rating this data is you need to have metadata for the distribution. So the way I build all this data is by looking at, so we saw in the meta.json the prereqs data structure that tells you all this. If a distribution doesn't have a meta.json or a meta.yaml, then there's no real way to automatically go and find out, well, what distributions is it dependent on? So my code that finds this just ignores those, but it spits them out. And so you can see as you go upstream, there are fewer and fewer distributions like this. But kind of scarily, there was one, like way up there, depended on by loads and loads of distributions that didn't have metadata, which meant less perhaps an issue for one that's right at the top of the river, but for the ones near the head of the river, it means, well, actually, they could be pushing a bunch of other modules much further upriver, but we don't know because there's no metadata for them. Final piece, I think, that is, well, really what was driving the discussions in Berlin was how should someone's development practices change as their distribution moves upriver? So, and instead of the 6 pots, I kind of try to chunk it down a bit smaller. So to no downstream dependence, a handful, a lot, and oodles. And I'll just kind of quickly go up these. But the basic idea is, as you go upriver, you want to get a bit more serious. And all of us as CPAN users want people's development practices to just get a bit more serious as they move up, because we need the reliability of the distributions to get better. If you've got no dependence, we need to at least to list your upstream dependencies, including core modules. So there's some discussion of whether you should or shouldn't, but I'm very much in the camp of you should list all your dependencies. It doesn't harm anyone to list core modules, and some modules occasionally drop out of being core. So it's useful to always list them and not rely on the fact that they will stay core. Make sure you have a meta JSON as well as a meta YAML. There are various benefits to supporting meta JSON. It's basically a more modern and more complete metadata model for distributions. And if the API is going to be unstable, document that very clearly at the top of your documentation. So if this is just some experiment, then say that. It just means that people are a lot less likely to choose to depend on your module if you say from the get-go that it's flaky and you plan on it staying flaky. If you've got a handful of dependents, then specify the oldest version of Perl that you plan to support, and you can see why that is from that graph we saw earlier. A suite that does more than load the module. Plenty of the positive tests that are on CPAN testers are just because the distribution has one test that just does require module, yeah, it's good to go. Use an OSI approved license and have that specified in the metadata. Have a changes file, which is more to benefit end users. Matrix, and start looking at CPANs and quality, which is basically a measure of how well behaved is your distribution for tools and things like that to work with. So does it follow all the modern conventions, which basically makes life easier for tool developers in particular. If you've got a lot of dependents, and this is really the point where you need to start being aware of your dependency graph and really thinking about that. Doing developer releases, if you make any non-trivial changes, also need to think about backwards compatibility. Because if you change your API and say, yeah, sod it, doesn't matter. This API I didn't really think about, now I've thought how it should be done. And who cares about all those other modules relying on me? Those authors should just fix it. Well, but if there's 500 of them, it's going to take them a long time to get around to it. Having good test coverage, and again, hopefully you can see why that is now. The main point at the bottom is if you start using another module, let the author know. Because if you're some way upstream, then you could be the person who shoots someone upriver, and it could be your fault that other people start shouting at the poor bugger. Oodles are dependents. So at this point, you need to start thinking about your bus factor. So really should make sure that your distribution has a co-mate or possibly has a team on GitHub looking after it, having a mailing list, worrying about the test coverage for your distribution and performance regression as well. Testing with multiple versions. So how many people here rely on text CSV XS? So it's an XS module for processing CSVs. So, okay, quite a few of you. So I use it probably every day. And the guy who works on this is a regular attendee at the QA hackathon. Before he releases any version of that module, he tests not only his module, percentage of all his downstream dependents on 214 different builds of Perl. Basically for lots of different versions of Perl, lots of different operating systems, and lots of different configure options as well for threaded Perl, for long doubles, etc. A whole bunch of different permutations, just so that he's really confident that he's not going to be the cause of anyone else's code breaking. Pretty unusual. That's kind of like at the really good end of practices. And he started working on a checklist of that other people could follow. So that's his link there at the bottom of here's what you should do if you've got lots of downstream dependence. So conclusion, I've kind of gone quite a bit over, my apologies, on my original 15 minutes. So you don't control your position on the river. Your river position can change rapidly if someone shoots you upstream. And if you're going to do that to someone else, you should let them know. It should mature as you move upriver. One of the good things about CPAN is the very low barrier to entry. One of the things that kind of came out in this discussion at the hackathon was that there's no barrier to moving upstream. And actually, you don't get told when you move upstream. So that's one of the things we want to change. We need an agreed measure for distribution quality. And that's going to be one of the next blogs that I do is about distribution quality and what that might mean. To improve the quality of CPAN, we need to do it from the top of the river down, because that's where we're going to have the biggest impact. And really importantly, we really should tell people when we move their distributions upstream. So, any questions?
Yeah, I have a question. If I have a
Yep.
module, I want to run it against that big matrix, is there a way of doing that without actually submitting it to CPAN?
Yes. So there's two ways you can do it. So you can do a developer release. So if you do a developer release, it will still get all the tests run, and you can see the results on that matrix. So if I've made a change to one of my modules, entirely sure, and in fact, if I've changed any functionality, if I know other people are using it, I'll do a developer release first. And if you wait about 8 days, that will give you the best coverage. So I analyzed all the data for how quickly results come back on the CPAN testers. And basically, after the 8th day, it suddenly drops off, but you steadily get a stream of results. You get a lot in the first day, particularly from Bingos, Chris Williams, but you get a steady number of returns, particularly for Windows, all throughout those first 8 days. So that is the best way to get that kind of view. If you want to see, well, am I going to break other things? If you don't have those operating systems to hand, your best bet is to do a developer release. You can use Travis, and so you can push a release to GitHub and get test results back that way. Okay, I think those are probably all the ways. I mean, the other thing you can do is, which doesn't really give you the matrix, but Dave Rolski has got a module which lets you test your downstream dependence. So if you're thinking of doing a release, it will run tests of all your downstream dependents, as well as letting you run your tests. So you could have an auto test done with that.
Very cool. Okay, yeah, that answered my question. Thanks.
Good. Any other questions?
I have a question. Are you sort of recommending that, like the more solid modules should be like 5.6? Support Perl 5.6?
No. So these days the chain says that it supports 5.8.1 onwards. So if you're releasing a module and you want it to be used very widely, then you really should be aiming to support you could argue 5.8.1. I think these days 5.10 plus is a good target to aim for, and making sure it works on lots of different versions of lots of different operating systems as well. What I try to do is document it for all of my distributions and also put it in the metadata what the minimum version of Perl is supported, so that at least then when people go and look at the matrix, if they see, there's a line of, so if you say my module only supports 5.10 or later, then when you go and look at the matrix here, where is the bugger? Here we go. And it will be colored yellow. So when you look at a lot of distributions, there's a yellow band across the bottom, which basically is, okay, it doesn't support this version, as opposed to it's broken on this version.
But I guess there's also the dependency. If you've got downstream dependencies, I mean, is there sort of like an implicit then minimum version if you specify a minimum version?
So if you say, so if you released a module, let's say you released a module and you didn't specify a minimum version of Perl, and loads of people started using it, and then you said, yeah, sod it, I'm gonna only support 5.14 plus features from then, and you put that in the metadata saying only works in 5.14 plus, and possibly you start using some language features so it really only works on 5.14 plus, then suddenly all those people downstream of you, their modules can't be installed on older versions of Perl because you've blocked them. So it's something to at least be aware of. So I think it's fine if when you release it, it's clearly documented, and right from the start you say only supporting 5.14 plus. And Rick Signes did this last year, late last year, explicitly said, right, I can't remember which distribution it was, but it said, I'm only going to support 5, I can't remember if it was 14 or 5.16. He said, look, I want to use some of these features on CPAN, and this is a tool that I think is going to be used by modern developers. They're going to have recent versions of Perl, so that's okay. I think that's fine. He was making that really clear from the start, and it was very clearly documented. It's pulling that move on people if you've gained a load of dependencies and you then do it in a way that suddenly is forcing your decision on lots of other people is the thing that's a questionable practice.
I was thinking more of the case. You've always said, okay, I need 5.14. Someone uses your module, they don't specify any version. So, but eventually
right.
they've really got a dependency on, they can only good for 5.14. That does.
Yes. So in that case, so I think it would be really useful if, as part of kind of processing the River of CPAN, if we told people, case would be if someone says on their module that they support 5.10 plus, say, but then there's someone upstream of them who support 5.12 plus, then I think we should send them a message that says, do you know, you think that you support 5.10 plus, but you don't because you're dependent on this thing that supports 5.12 plus. So those kind of mismatches in versions we should tell people about. Whenever I release a module, if I choose to rely on something which is, say, requires 5.10, then I always put that as a hard dependency in mine, just so that it's documented against mine rather than them having to discover it when they try and install it and discover that it breaks at that point.
Okay.
Did I answer that question that time?
Yes.
Any other questions?
Jim had one, but he unfortunately just dropped off. Oh,
Oh.
here he is.
Oh,
Jim,
he's just come back again.
you had a question, Jim? There, Jim?
Maybe he was so annoyed by my last answer, he just dropped off in disgust. Okay, so if that's where we got to, that was questions. If there's no more questions, so I had one question for you guys.
I've got one question.
And let's hear your question.
Yeah, is there a mechanism for having a moving dependency where you want to say, I'm only promising to support Perl that is less than 6 years old. So each year it's going to change version.
No, there isn't. I mean, there kind of is in a way, because we release Perl every year for a given year. You could, like in your makefile.pl, you could have some code that looks up the year and says, okay, given where we are in the year, I know that the most current live version of Perl is this. Therefore, I'm only going to support back to here. And you could then dynamically put that in the metadata. So you could do it that way. There's no other mechanism, but you could hack it in the makefile.pl yourself.
Yes, that's similar, although not necessarily as egregious as having no version dependency and then adding one and catching people that were dependent on you. You know, I was thinking that it would be nice to say in advance that this is going to be my practice. If you want to depend on this module, stay vaguely modern.
Yeah, okay, I'm just going to make a note of that because
But in that case, shouldn't you have to update it manually just to demonstrate that you're still maintaining it?
Yeah, I would update it as well. But it's just that I don't want somebody to say, but I've been using it for 4 years now and you suddenly broke it. You put a new dependency on a higher version than what I'm using.
Yeah, and in the same way, so the tool chain.
They knew what they were getting into.
I've just made a note of that, so to bring up in the River discussions at the Toolchain Summit. Okay, so no more questions. Okay, so I get to ask my question. So I have just one question for you. So, so chips, yeah, I have no problem with chips. And cheese, I have no problem with cheese. Gravy, yeah, okay, it has its moments. But all three together on the plate,
Have you had poutine? Have you had it?
Sorry? So I probably should have it before I cast
case.
dispersion, but...
Cheese curds, not cheese.
It's delicious.
It's got junky gravy on it.
It's really amazing if you've been up north in February and you come in out of like -40 and that's dinner. It feels wonderful.
But yeah, Neil, don't try. Those are my people.
Yeah, maybe I'll ask Olaf to put some in a thermos flask and bring it over to the Toolchain Summit this year. Okay, for your time, and now I guess I'm going to go to bed. Sorry, Yanick.
It's okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Just midnight there.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Wilco.
Nice finish.
Okay. 15 minutes, he said.
Yeah, that's a metric.
Okay, so I'm super happy to be here. I wanted to come for years now. So yeah, I was thinking of what should I present to Hellmongers. I thought JavaScript, of course. Yeah, because basically last year I decided to bite the bullet and go and look at the JavaScript ecosystem. I mean, I knew JavaScript language for a long time, but I didn't look at any of the new stuff, so I decided to go and look at that. And it's beautiful. It's terrible, but it's a lot of stuff. And yeah, basically it's just that, just like Perl, it's a very vast ecosystem and there's a lot of frameworks, a lot of things. Right now, they're just bubbling ideas left and right. And where you say that there's ideas, it means that there's ideas to steal. And usually when I learn new stuff, I like to try to port it to Perl just to see how it works underneath, just the way that I learn things. And yeah, so that's what I did with a couple of things. And yeah, one of the jokes is that at first I was talking to a friend and he said, okay, look at Redux, it's cool. And I went and I looked at Redux, it's a model framework. So for the logic part of your application, it took me something like 2 or 3 weeks. I wrote Pollux, which is Perl version, very quickly, very quick and dirty. I came back and said, yeah, that's nice. And said, oh yeah, it's nice, but it's old. I mean, right now, MobX is really what it's at. So I went back for 2 weeks and again wrote something Perl aside, and I went, okay, yeah, I think I still prefer Redux, but MobX, if it's not a hot thing, that's not too bad. And he went, yeah, I mean, that's quite passé now. Now React and JSX is the new thing. And so forth and so on. And yeah, so what I want to do today is basically give what is the core ideas of Redux and MobX, but using the Perl code and Perl idiosyncrasies to show how it's being made. Yeah, I thought that Neil was going to use 15 minutes. And I don't come to Toronto that often, so I actually packed something like 3 presentations. I will probably not have time to go to template Caribou. If we're lucky and if I talk super quickly, maybe MobX, but we'll see. Worst case, I will just have to come back. And if anybody has questions at any time, just throw them in and we'll see what happens. And yeah, so let's begin with Redux. And the nice thing is that I'm going to talk about Redux, but it also applies to Flux and Vuex and a couple of other frameworks that kind of work the same way. So tonight, you're going to potentially learn stuff about Perl, about Redux, and about those 2 at the same time. So very condensed. The thing with Redux is that they try to make things foolproof. They try to make things as simple as possible and as hard as can get to shoot yourself in the foot. So they aim for simplicity, consistency, predictability. And how do they do that? They centralize all the information about the application at that central place. They say that, okay, once you actually create the state of your application, you will not be able to change it. And actually, we don't even trust you to play with it directly. There's going to be an interface between you and that state such that you cannot muck things up. So basically, the state of Redux is dead spot. You have spot that is cut in the middle and you cannot touch it and cannot change, cannot do anything. So yeah, let's look at the details. So centralize. The idea is that in most applications, what you will end up with is you will have variables that have different pieces of information about your application. Probably going to have objects, you're going to have links here and there. Redux says that instead, you want to put everything in a single component, in a single TeamD that is going to hold all the information of your application. And that thing, that state, is going to be a plain data structure. No object, no magic, nothing that just morph by itself. It's going to be a plain data structure that can be a href, an arrayref, whatever you want. It can be as deep and as structured as you want. But the thing is that it's just data, which means that as soon as you have that state, since it's all at a single place and since it's all just data, it's very easy to serialize. It's very easy to save somewhere. And it's very easy to capture, keep on ice, and bring back when you want to do things like test your application with exactly that structure. The other thing is consistency. So one of the big problems and one of the things that is hard with programming is variables because, well, they vary in function of time. For example, here, if you have a state that holds information about ships, and by the way, the joke is that I've been working for the last 7 years on a small game with spaceships, a little bit like Battletech, but in space. But the thing is that I use that as my playground to learn all those new technologies. So what I always end up doing is try to work on that game, then create modules, then talk about those modules, then go to other places and talk to people and so on and so forth. So yeah, that game still has something like 20 lines written and something like 25 modules that actually have been spawned out of it. But anyway, so basically, you have your ship, you create your state, and when you create your state, you say, okay, this is the state at a specific moment. But later on, either you or a function that you call or something else will change something in that state, and it's not what you were expecting. Here, it's a little bit of a silly example because you change it yourself, and it's obvious that, yeah, that's what you do. But very often, it's just a little more sneaky. Like here, I have my ship. I copy, or I think that I copy my ship into my state. And later on, I change my ship thinking that my state is going to stay the same. But since this is a pointer, it's a reference, you actually change the structure. So yeah, it's probably a bug, and you're going to wonder, okay, why did that change? And after you look at your code, you realize that, oh yeah, I changed that here, and the thread goes there, and so on and so forth. So yeah. So Redux goes, okay, guys, we're going to make things immutable. As soon as you assign something to a variable, it's going to be locked in. It's done. If you want to change that state, you're actually going to take another variable and you're going to assign the state to that new variable. Everything is going to be great. And when I began to read about that, I was, yeah, sure. And then they were giving good arguments. So I said, okay, that's great, that's good. How do you do that in JavaScript? And the thing is, you can't. With plain old JavaScript, it's just like Perl, variables are variables. And if you use Redux, the plain old Redux, they just say, keep things immutable and just don't change them. So basically, don't step on the grass, and that's how it stays green. In reality, there's a couple of plugins that exist where you can actually, with object mimic, immutable objects and variables. So if you're interested, look at immutable.js or immutable seamless.js, and both are doing the job. In Perl, we have a couple of things that do that. There is the module called read-only and the const fast, which is the one that I prefer these days. And it's super easy to use. Basically, you just do const my variable and you assign to it. And it's going to ensure that that variable now is cast in stone and it's never going to change again. So here, I'm just reusing the same example. But here now, since my store is a const, I can change my ship, and that is not going to change my store because that's just frozen in time. And if I try to change my store directly, it's just going to crash. It's going to throw an extension and say that, no, sorry, you cannot do that. So we do have the technology to do it. But yeah, immutable states are fine, but in applications, we actually want to change things from time to time. So how do we do that? It's actually not that bad. It's a little more lengthy than what we do usually. But like, for example, with arrays, you want to add something at the front. Well, you just pass the old array. If you want to add something at the end, you pass the old array and something, whatever you want to add after that. If you want to prepend on an array, you put the new variables at the front. If you want to remove, you can use slice. If you're a little more clever, you can say undef for the first variable, and the new is only going to take the values after that. To remove things from the tail, you can always do also the slice. Or if you're a little bit crazy, you can actually take the old one, reverse the array, do the trick of indef new and then reverse again. Probably don't do that. You can too. If you want to remove chunks at the front or at the end, you can use before and after. And now you're probably going to ask, well, before and after, that doesn't exist, right? Yes, it does. But it does in list. Actually, those two are from list more utils. And so those three modules there are all also accessible via list all utils. And that is awesome to use with list. Does anybody already use that here? Excellent. Everybody else, look at that. It's going to save you a lot of time. If you work with JavaScript and you know Lodash, that's pretty much the level of usefulness that we have in Perl. It's all little functions that you can mimic easily with grep and map. But the nice thing is that you don't, because they're already implemented and they're nice. So yeah, this being said, still with arrays, if you want to remove specific elements, there's always grep. So that's a classic. And the other classic, if you want to transform your old array doing whatever, you have map. With hashes, it's not that common, but it's not that much harder. You want to add or modify elements. Well, you just pass the old hash and you add new things at the end. If you want to do subsets, you have the hash slice that I think came with Perl 5.14, 16. So yeah, basically you can get the keys, grep on some value, and you're going to get only those values. In list util, you have pair grep and also pair map. Those I use all the time. And basically it's just like grep and map, except that instead of sending a single value, it sends pairs of values. So if you pass it, an hash is going to always give you A and B, which is the key and the value of the moment. That's awesome.
When was that introduced?
A couple of years ago. It's not.
Hash slices?
No, it's not a hash slice.
Oh, the hash slice. I think it's 14, but I'm not sure.
Wow.
But yeah.
I missed that. Thank you.
And yeah, again, to transform, instead of map, you use pair map. Yeah.
Nice.
So, okay, now we can actually modify values, but the store is still immutable. So, yeah, it's still how we actually modify the store. Because I said that also that we don't want to touch it ourselves because we don't trust developers to do that. So instead, we're going to use messaging. And what it means is that what you're going to do is you have your old store. You're going to send a message that is going to say what you want to modify. And that store and that message is going to create a new version of the store. Think a little bit like git commits. Each store is going to be a state in time. And the change of code are going to be the messages that are going to give you the information that what do you want to modify to your store. Messages, super simple. Basically, you have a type, which is, okay, what is this message want to do? So here, I want to add a player to my state. And you have a payload that is a structure, any type of structure that you want. So here, it's a simple one. I just pass the name of the new player. And with Redux, they say that the mutations that the message is going to bring to the store must be deterministic, which means that if you have store A and you send a specific message, you're always going to get the same state B. And there's no side effects. So there's no prints, there's no anything that is going to happen on the hard drive or going to send to an endpoint somewhere. And they do that such that if you have your a specific state in time and you have all the different messages that happen after that, you can actually just replay those things and you're always ensure that you're going to get the same state at the end. Redux is mostly used for web applications, and it means that you can basically take a snapshot of your web app at any point in time. And if you know that you did those 3 different things and you had a bug, you can very easily just replay that. So you can go back in time, replay, and you know that you will always get the same thing. Of course, it's nice that it's supposed to be deterministic, but we actually sometimes want to have randomness, or we want sometimes to write to things like that. So with that little diagram of you sending messages to the store, right now the only thing that can introduce randomness or interaction is that you part. In fact, and I don't have time to talk about that tonight, but with Redux, you can actually have middleware that is sneak between you and the messages. So that middleware can actually look at what you're sending and can, for example, add some element of randomness or add information or perform actions that are going to save things on disk or whatnot. And actually, what matters, what is the messages that matter that must always be deterministic is whatever is going to enter the store. So a little after that is done. And just to complete the cycle with Redux, you can also have observers that are going to look at the store and react if there's anything that is changing. So with that, now you can have a full circle that you say that, okay, if the state change in that way, trigger those new messages that are going to return to the middleware, and they can react and basically trigger a chain of events. So now, how do you actually mix those state and messages? With a function called a reducer. And a reducer is basically a function that is going to take your old state, going to take that action, that message that you just sent, and is going to return a brand new state that is going to reflect the new state of your app. So if, for example, we have a store that has 2 big clumps, you have players and you have ships, and you send a message that says, okay, add player left. Since that store is super complicated because it has 2 elements, we're just going now to look at the player side. That function, it could look like, okay, we receive the old state and the action. If the action is add player, we're going to modify the state. We're going to take the old state and we're going to add that new player with no ships because we started with 0. And if the action is not add player, then we don't care. We just return the old state because for us, it makes absolutely no difference. For the ship part of our state, the fact that we had a player makes absolutely no difference. So right now, we just have a default where we say that, okay, we have an action, we don't care, we just return the old state, that's it, that's all. But now, if we have an action that is add a ship, that has a player, an ID, and a name. Now for the reducer that deals with the players, we just add now a new condition in our given statement. So we still deal with the action that is add player the same way. But if we add a ship, now we're going to basically modify that player field and add the ship ID to his list of ships. And for the ship reducer, now we actually care if we see the action add ship, and we're going to basically just add that information to our list of ships. And if it's anything else, as before, we return the previous state. Now, the beauty is that we split the logic between the player part and the ship part. And if you go one level up, it's basically divide and conquer. If you look at your main reducer, it's going to be, you take your action, you send your action to your ship reducer, your player reducer, you take the new state that has been returned by both, and you just create a new structure with those things. So basically, what you can do is you begin with a single reducer that's going to deal with your whole state, and when it gets a little too big, you will see which sections are the beefier, and you can always cut and just have recursion until you have itsy-bitsy reducer that deal with a subset of your state. And so, yeah, very quickly, Pollux, which is my part of Redux in Perl, yeah, since it's very simple underneath, this is just a couple of helpers. So Pollux itself create a class that you can pass reducers for all of those different elements, and it's going to basically organize them into a bigger reducer. Reducer will look like this. And there's Pollux action that is basically going to take the action name that you want to give it and the fields, and it's going to create a class that is going to be that you will be able to just call the class with whatever parameters that you want, dispatch up to the store, and it's going to take care of everything in the background. And yeah, basically that's it. And yeah, for Redux, there's probably a lot more that can be told about it. There's the middlewares that are just a big section by themselves. There's probably all the different tools that you can use for immutability, for that dealing with the states to go back in time and do that type of debugging that is something by itself. But in a nutshell, and in what, 30 minutes, that's pretty much it. So, well, first question, is there any questions about that one?
By Pollux.
Yeah, I was trying to be clever and try to find something that was Redux and Perlish, and for once I came up with a name. So basically I just began to repeat Perl and Redux until it kind of mashed together and was, yeah, okay.
So no Rome connection.
No wrong connection.
That took you 2 to 3 weeks?
Yeah. Well, don't quote me on that. And yeah, there was a lot of other things going in between. But yeah, documentation on Redux is pretty good on their site. My first slide there has actually the link, so you can go there. And yeah, the nice thing is that that framework is very, very small. I realized that in me blabbing for 20 minutes, it doesn't sound like it, but it's very simple underneath. Once you get it, it's yeah, basically just recursive functions that take your state, put it together, and that's it. And there's nice tools that you can inspect the state of your web apps on the front end. It goes well with React, with a couple of other frameworks. So yeah, I like it a lot.
What do you use it with?
First, I use it with React, and then Jack, I don't know if he's going to watch it, but he said, "Oh, I just discovered Vue, and that looks cool." That's one of the things that you should never ever tell me. It's oh, shiny. So now I look at Vue, and it's cool. And Vue has its own Redux-like backend model thingy called Vuex, which is also very nice. It's a little more reactive than Redux itself. And first, I moved to Vuex, but Vuex only supports a single store for your application, whereas Redux basically don't care as long as you have your store, you're good. So now I'm kind of using both. Was there a question online, or?
Sorry, Antonio, did you have a question? Oh. All right.
Okay. So it's 8:20.
Mhm.
You want me to try MobX and see if I can put everybody to sleep? Okay. It should be a little, well, I was going to say it should be a little faster. We'll see about that. But yeah, stop me whenever you cannot hold it anymore. So Redux is all about keeping things simple and non-magic and just easy to understand and hard to break. MobX is on the other side of the room. They are all about reactive programming, which is basically action at distance. You change something here, and it's magically going to update everything else. Which sounds cool, terrifying, but cool. And my laptop just decided that enough was enough. So then, okay, let's see. It's already frozen.
Stand by. Technical difficulties temporary.
And I was doing so great.
Alex, the key value slices are in Pro 520.
Okay,
Okay, so that's even.
yeah, because I thought, I'm usually kind of up to date on what's going on in Perl, and that was brand new to me. So I thought, oh boy, I've been doing meat and potatoes too long.
Okay.
Falling behind, Beamish.
Oh.
Scary.
Here we go. And
Oh my.
Start X.
I just
You don't move right into X, do you? Heathen.
Yeah, sorry, Ubuntu 16.10 or whatever it is.
I put Linux Mint on my old iMac. That boots straight up to the command line first.
Although I do Control Alt F1 to sometimes see what's going on when the windowing is frozen. What is it doing?
Okay, it's going to take 2 minutes to reboot. Yeah, I'm at that point where I really need my slides. But here, actually, I can probably just tell you to close your eyes and imagine the next 2 minutes. So basically, with reactive programming, if you have variable X that depend on something that you do on variable Y, typically, if you change Y after the fact, X is going to keep the old value because, well, magic doesn't exist. But with reactive programming, magic does exist. And it actually, you can tell that, okay, Y is going to check whatever values it depends on. And it's going to know by itself that, okay, I depend on X for my value. And whenever X is going to be modified, then it's going to follow suit.
Cool.
Right.
Okay, so I have to go back to Twitter. That's important.
Just one. You're on camera.
Zoom right in and on his display and just broadcast it that way.
Hey, yeah, that's one way to broadcast. Stroke loading. Oh, actually.
Cut the sound.
Repeat after me. Technology is supposed to facilitate communication.
Ha! Yeah, right. Okay, we're going to go
Promongers meetings are the new esports.
Very zen-like esports.
Hmm?
Very zen-like esports.
Oh, of course.
Has anyone referred to you as Zen-like before, Yanick?
Not yet.
Okay.
There we go. Okay, so I'm here for us. I'm going to share with the rest of the world.
I'll see you in the hangout. Oh, you haven't joined yet, that's why.
Join. I'm going to
Alright.
share this. Okay, I'm there.
There we go. All right.
Okay, only took 10 minutes. Great.
No, that's all the time we have.
So yeah, what I said is basically if you have a second variable like your ship status that depends on all, well, if after that you modify the all, it's not going to change ship status. But if you're, for example, using moves, you could do something like if you change all, it's going to trigger that piece of code and it's going to modify the other variables. That's still not ideal because you have to actually think that, oh yeah, those variables affect those other ones, and it will be nice if the code could just figure out that detail. Like people say that have my all, is going to observe whatever happens, and it's going to react to whatever state that changed inside that piece of code. But the question is, yeah, and that sounds wonderful. How to actually do that? Well, one way to do that will be to do things like use PPI and BD parts and actually look at the code, create the tree, figure out which variables are in that piece of code. And no, technically it's probably possible, but it will require that you actually re-implement Perl to know what that code is going to do. There's, however, a much easier way to go, which is to have the variables snitch on themselves. So, for example, you can say that those variables are observable, which means that those variables know that when they are modified, they're just going to raise their ends. So when you're going to run some code, you will, at the end, just look at all the variables that are there at their ends in the air, and you will know that, okay, I depend on those different things, and you will be able to create a tree of dependency that way. So if I go back with this example here, I have a couple of conditions. If I have a first state where I have all of 10 instead of 20, I run this code here, the observer, and so first it look at, is the all smaller than 0? That's not true, we're going to continue, but we just use all, so all raise its end. After that, we look at the minimum between all and engine, so we touch both variables. Both of them, well, all already has its end in the air, but engine do the same thing. And again, does not match, so we go to the next one, but that one doesn't use any variable. But we know at the end of that block that status actually depend on all and engine. So we can create a little graph, and we will basically know that after that, if all and engine change, we have to change status because it depends on both of them. Later on, if engine becomes 5, again, it's the same thing that we're going to hit the two lines, the two first returns, and we're going to have the ends raising. If suddenly the all becomes 0, we're only hitting the first condition, so only all become the dependency of status. So basically, each time that it runs, it can just detect what it depends on for the next time that it's going to change. So how to do that? Well, if you use moves, you have those method modifier that you can say whenever before or after you do something, run a different piece of code. So that's basically what we want to do here. So what we can do is for anything that we want to observe, we put a trait that is observable. And here it's a little big, but that's pretty much all the code that is required. What you do in that trait is that before you read a variable, you make it raise its end. So basically you push the name of that variable in the dependencies. And after you modify a variable, you look in the tree of dependency to see anything that depends on it. and you call a function that says that, okay, all those guys here, the dependency have changed, so it needs to have a new value recomputed. For the observer, it's even more simple. You put the observer trait, you put a default function, and I didn't incorporate the code there. And basically, it's going to, before running the default, it's going to say that, okay, I'm in watching mode. It's going to calculate what is the default, and then look at all the dependencies. Going to put them somewhere in a graph that says that one depends on those one, and that's it. Whenever one of the dependencies is modified, it's going to be the after method there that is going to trigger the changes. Oh, actually, I put it there. So around the observer is going to say that, okay, watching mode, I run my code, I create my graph, and I'm good. That's what moves. That's doable. Now, without moves, with purely real variables, is there a way to do that? Can anybody guess what kind of evil darkness?
Tide hash.
You got it. Ties. That's something that we don't. Are you wincing? That's something that we don't use often. But with Perl, it's possible basically for any type of variable, hash, array, or scalar, basically to tie it to a class. And that class is going to implement ways how to store information and how to retrieve it. And who says class says that it can be a moves class, and then we're good to go. So, for example, here I'm taking the easiest of them all, scalar. So the class that is implementing that basically implement store and fetch, how to store the scalar and how to fetch it, and also how to create the type variable, but that's boring. So that's not super scary yet. When we want to make it observable, we have a role. And everything that I did before in the code with the pure moves thing, I just reproduce here with, okay, before we fetch, we actually say that we are in watching mode and we initialize our array of dependencies. And after that, we store the information, which means that that variable has been modified. We just let the graph dependency know that, okay, that value changed. So if anything depends on that, modify them. And yeah, basically observable. So when I do my x colon observable, that's just an attribute. So that's just a direct call to a function observable ref. That is going to, yeah, that's the more magical part. It's going to take that scalar and tie it. And that's mostly just making sure that all the pipes connect at the right place. And that's actually the real code. I just remove what I do with the hashes and the arrays, but it's not that more complicated. And yeah, for the observer, same thing. Create an observer function, and you just create a class that is an observer with the generator, which is the function that is going to generate your new value. And yeah, the function has a string overload such that from the outside, it's just going to look like it's actually the value that it returns, but underneath, it's actually the full class that does its thing. And yeah, actually, that's the same information. Don't care about that. And yeah, that's pretty much it. And I didn't use it a lot because it scares me a little bit, but it works. And oh yeah, little detail right now, when the dependency changes, I do a little bit of optimization. I don't modify everything that observes them. What I do, because it's all based on a value that is least evaluated and as a default, I just clear the value. So the next time that something is going to try to access it, it's going to recompute that value only then. So it's on-demand recalculation of days. And actually, in my module, there's an option to make it auto-run each time, so that if you actually want it to be done eagerly each time that something is modified, you can do it. So far, one of the use that I found for it is debugging. Like you have a mysterious variable somewhere in your code that you don't know where it changed. I found that it's super easy to just say that, okay, now this is an observable. And my observer is just going to print, something happens each time that is being modified. And you can put all the information that, oh yeah, it happened at that line and blah, blah, blah. So you can just follow and know exactly when things happen. And yeah, besides that, I didn't really use it yet. It was just for the giggles of knowing if that can actually be implemented, and it could. Please forgive me. Yep.
Another use for the always evaluate would be if you're implementing something like make. You have a stat on the file.
Yep.
Don't encourage him.
But yeah, anything that you want to just react to something that happens in your code.
That allows reacting to something outside of
Yep.
the code.
So yeah, writing programming to Perl, because Perl was just not gotcha-ish enough. So. So yeah, in between the two, right now I'm much more in love with Redux because I'm crazy, but I have my limits. Redux kind of seems sane to actually do a real project. MobX is neat, but yeah, there's so much ways that things can just happen at a distance and you can get confused. But yeah, they're tools, they're there. Sometimes they can be useful. So yeah, that's what I learned from JavaScript these days.
Do you mark something as changed if it gets assigned the same value?
Right now, yes, because I'm still at the very slim code stage. It could be fairly easy to add conditions that, just look at the new value, and if it's the same, it's just going to not update it.
Because if you've got things that are dependent on each other in a loop,
Yeah.
so that they eventually come down to the final answer.
Oh yeah, I'm not sure that actually put a loop detection. No, I did. Oh, I'm smart. Well, actually, I'm not smart. I rely on modules that are good because instead of creating my graph myself, I use either GraphEZ or Graph, and I put that in acyclic mode. So by default, if it finds a cycle in the graph, it's going to break it. So that way, I'm assured, kind of, I hope that you cannot have that cyclic that X depend on Y depend on Z. It's going to just refuse to do that. But the module is still very young, so there's probably a couple of ways that will be improved.
It might be useful, let's say, in simulation, but except in simulation, you may want to have loops, so you almost need to have some sort of, if you can stick in a delay to just have a single cycle of the change of the state.
Yep, simulation will be a great example of where you want that kind of things to happen. And so yeah.
The canonical one is spreadsheets.
No, I draw the line there.
This value depends on this formula, which pulls things at their current value.
All those tools belong to you.
Change the
but not
value
the
and everything
spreadsheet.
else just updates automatically.
No, absolutely. That will be also something that could be done, that you have equations that depend on each other and just magically update themselves. So it's 8:40. I still have something like 20 slides if you feel like it.
do it. We often end up going to 9.
Excellent. Okay, those will be a little more sketchy because I didn't honestly think that people will survive up to a year. Yeah, so basically templating system, because any developer at some point will create their own templating system. I think it's just because templating systems are so idiosyncratic to what we want. So we really have a specific itch to scratch. And yeah, for me, that itch was that most templating systems are there because they want to create mini languages that are simple and that are scary as the full JavaScript or the full Perl or the full Ruby, whatever, and that are a little more easy to deal with. But the thing is that Perl scariness for me, well, it's too late. Like I embraced that years and years ago. So I program in Perl. I have no problem with Perl. I want my templating system to use Perl. And yeah, when you have something where you have your little templating mini language and your real language, you end up with a chimera where you have half Perl code, half HTML, and your Vim syntax highlighter go crazy. And it's hard on the eyes because you have two frame of mind going at the same time. So yeah, man, as I said, I like Perl, so I want to program in Perl. So for the longest time, my go-to was Mason, without the Apache madness. I don't apologize. It was a good idea in the 90s. Nowadays, a little less so, but it's still not too bad. Let's see. And then I discovered template declare, which is also pretty good. It was created quite a few years ago. And the thing is, it looks a lot like Moose, but I think it was created before Moose. And yeah, for me, I really wanted to be something a little more mainstream that just looked like a Moose class and could have ancestry and roles and all that stuff. So yeah, basically I was looking for a templating system that is pure Perl, that will deal well with HTML, XML, SVG, Moose based because I love role and I roll that way. And and that is do what you mean to the max because there's a lot of things with templating that you just repeat yourself over and over again, and I cannot deal with that. So I wrote template caribou, which I'm not sure is a good idea, but I like it. I use it. I still work with it. So basically, how you use that, you create a class. That class is going to be just a regular Moose class. So it can have regular attributes. And you have a new keyword that's called template. And it's just like a method, except that under the hood is going to capture everything that you print on std out inside that function. And when you render one of those templates like that, it's going to return the value. So far, this is not exactly rocket science. There's basically, I just capture std out. I also create a second channel called raw, where you get, because on std out, I was queued and it automatically escaped anything that is HTML related. So angle brackets are going to be ampersand, LT, semicolon. If you really want to print HTML in a raw form, you do print raw blah, and it's going to do it. But where it begins to shine is I also have a series of modules that implement tags. So for example, here begins, I actually use all the HTML tags. And in my main template, I call two sections, which are just basically also templates. And in the templates, I have those functions that just happens to have the same name as the tags. And basically, a tag will be the name of the tag, a code ref body that is going to be the body of the tag. And inside, you can have more tags and basically write HTML that way. And And yeah, basically it's going to do what you think it's going to do. It's going to print the tag head with the tag title inside, with the content my title, all of that. And it's all Perl based. You can use your syntax highlighter. You can pretty code your code, and everything's going to work fine. And all those tags, you can also put attributes. So in a div, you can add attribute class greeting, yada, yada, yada. It's going to do the obvious thing. Since it's super common to say that, okay, I'm going to have a div that is going to be always of class greeting, I just use exporter tiny to that give you for free the possibility to have a generic tag or a generic element, I should say, that here I call my tag and say that, okay, I'm going to call it block. And you can modify it with arguments. So for example, here I can say that, okay, I'm going to create a new tag for this template. It's going to be called div greeting. It's a div. By default, it's going to be a div. It's going to have the class greeting. And now instead of having to piece it yourself, div add attribute class greeting, you just call div greeting. That's it. That's all. You're done. That is nice. Now I decided to be nicer or crazier. And just with the regular tags, to create a link, you will do it that way. You will create the link function. You will pass the attribute relationship. It's a shortcut icon. The href is going to be whatever you want, and that's it. But I want to create a fav icon. I don't want to remember that I want to do that, or that I have to do that. I just want to pass that. So in that extended module, I just go and I implemented shortcuts for the most common thing. So fav icon, you just have to pass the URL. It's going to do what you think it will do. Same thing for style sheet and script includes. I never ever remember how to actually link style sheets. I have to go and look or Google, okay, the real, what is the value, so on and so forth. So I created those two functions. I just do CSS include, JavaScript include. It's going to create a tag for me. And I don't have slides for that, but actually to create those those new keywords, it's super easy. You basically write that into a function that does most of the munging. And then I went further down the rabbit hole, and I have some of the tags like markdown that is going to take text, markdown text, going to convert that into HTML. So I don't actually have to use those angle brackets anymore. I have something that do less style sheets. So it's going to take a less piece of code, going to translate that into CSS. There's a few others like that. But yeah, basically, I have those two categories of a module. The one that is just, for example, HTML, that is just the tags as they are, and the extended where I just go full crazy and read the docs, BMAs or Btrify, whatever you want. Also, just like in JSX, where you can have different files for different pieces of your template, here too, with a role, you can say that, okay, look for that module, and in the same directory, if there's some files that have the extension .goo or .goo, and those are subtemplates, so load them and create them as method of your main class. So you can actually extend and don't need to have a main file that is 60,000 lines long. And that's it. So that one again is, yeah, if Neil was still here, he will probably say that, probably keep that at level 0 of the river because we don't know how fresh a fish is. But, and also since that one has been made mostly for my consumption, it's using, Perl 5.20 plus because I can. And I'm using really just experimenting with all the new features. But yeah, if there's a Friday night that you're bored and you want to look at something different.
Is it called Caribou because it's named after the drink?
Yeah, in part because it's moose based, and
Okay.
but yeah, the drink also fits quite well. It's
For the uninitiated, what's this drink? What's caribou?
it's
It's red wine and
Quebec
alcohol.
drink. I think it's rum.
I thought it was red wine and alcohol.
Yeah, I don't think I ever drank it.
Yeah, I
But-
know.
It's one of those things.
Oh, I had that at the Ice Hotel. Okay.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
got it in the Ville de Quebec and Old Montreal.
Yeah, they were serving that at the Ice Hotel outside of Quebec City.
There you go.
Yeah, it's one of those things that you go blind.
Yes.
Yeah, it goes well with poutine. It's actually yeah. So
It's
yeah,
a Quebecois kind of evening. That's lovely.
so yeah. There you go.
Just so you guys know, every time you cough, if you can muffle it a little, because you're deafening everyone online. And you're Velcro.
That was right. Sorry, that was right at the beginning.
Oh yeah, people online. Is there anybody online who has questions? Screams of distress.
You can type it, or you can unmute yourself.
Or you can unfollow me on Twitter.
Is it going to be posted to YouTube later? Yes, sir. Yeah, it usually is up the next morning. Thank you, Olaf.
And yeah, you'll see that all those projects are on GitHub. I did put pullets and move eggs on the CPAN. Public reboot too. Yeah, all three of them are there. So
How many modules do you have that you don't know which ones are on CPAN or not?
way too many. Well, the thing is, I have the good or the same modules that I put on CPAN without tuts. And then there's my experiments that I usually blog about and say that, okay, if anybody actually wants that, I can put that on CPAN. But the one I'm not too sure that, okay, the creature that I just created, should I just kill it in the darkness of my basement or unleash it to the world? Usually on Friday night, I just unleash it anyway because I roll that way. But
And this gaming engine that you use to experiment on, is that on GitHub?
there's an old version of on GitHub that was, I think, Perl based before I decided to go JavaScript. And the JavaScript version, well, you must understand that I went to JavaScript and said, okay, what should I use to create my projects? And that's where the ecosystem, I discovered everything. So I went from Grunt to Gulp to Webpack to Babel there. And yeah, so anyway, fast forward 6 months, I kind of was able to compile something. And then I went to Vue, and then Yanick said that, oh yeah, TypeScript is pretty cool, so now I'm trying that. All that to say that I've been looking at that game for 7 years, but the game itself, I wrote something like 3 things, and I keep changing them. Oh yeah, there's also the testing side of JavaScript where I went like, okay, people are using Mocha, Chai, Tap. Now there's something like 3 different implementations of Tap on JavaScript, so I had to try them all. Yeah, I just have to think that I do that for the greater good. So I did all of that for you all.
If the game is taking place in space, why were there only 2 coordinates?
Actually, I'm stealing the rules from something that already exists, and it's called full trust. It's actually a cool set of rules. It's fairly simple, but yet it has enough details to make the OCDs like me very happy. And yeah, they have rules for 2-dimension. It's tabletop, so they have 2-dimension for people, normal people that kind of have a table. They have rules for 3-dimension for people that like to hang those spaceships in their living room, but yeah, it's one of those things that 3D will be cool, but 2D just make more sense on a management level.
Or it's in Flatland.
Exactly, there you go.
This world.
But yeah, one day that game is going to come out, and then I will become rich or something. Don't laugh, not you.
And are you using template Caribou in production anywhere?
No. Wait, I should probably just say that with that much. Yeah, I don't think it's that bad. But yeah, I didn't use it in production for anything yet.
I did see it in our code internally. I know one developer was using it.
Cool. I have one user. Another one.
One little tributary up the river.
Yeah, just one of them that the version number is still very low, and I was not aware that anybody was using it. So just like Neil was saying, usually when I know that people are using my code, I take care not to break backward compatibility just for the heck of it. When it's one of my crazy projects that I know that nobody will touch just because, then I go to 520 and I change things.
Were you working on something to do with Vim plugins at one point?
Yes, one of the latest thing. Oh god, yeah, that other yak. That's one of the reasons why the game is never going to see the day, is because to do the game, I had to learn JavaScript. To learn JavaScript, I had to program more with Vim, with those things. And then Vim is cool, but then there was new Vim, which is a new port of Vim, and that has asynchronic plugin. So of course, I had to create a plugin system in Perl that deal with new Vim. So yeah, I probably should put somewhere the link to my blog. I don't think that it's super breathtaking, but yeah, I just post about all those things that I try. So yeah, basically I have both a plugin system for Vim and for NeoVim that talk to Perl. Either for NeoVim, it's totally a Perl server that will deal with its side of things, and then I discovered a task management system, so I had to create a framework for it in Perl. And now I have things that use Vim as the UI for that, and that use my Vim. Yeah, I bore easily.
I'm reminded of Bill Joy's remark that he realized when he spent more time editing or updating his editor than using it, he knew that something was wrong.
Those are true words.
Have you ever written a novel?
Well, short stories and comic books, but no novel yet. Eventually.
Editing on Perl Weekly.
Yep. Yeah, at some point we'll probably put all my blog entries together and create something. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I believe I went through all my slides.
All right, so thank you everyone for joining us online. We'll see you next month.